Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we're definitely not wading in the shallow end,
No, we are jumping straight into the deep end on this one.
straight into the eye of the storm. We're looking at a text that is, frankly, pretty radioactive in the current cultural climate. It's controversial, it's ultra long, and it is a really razor-sharp, incisive look at the state of modern masculinity.
It really is. We are reviewing the explosive new ebook, 90s Life for Men, Pre-Feminism When Women Were Women by Conrad Riker. And look, if you've been feeling like the ground has shifted under your feet, if the cultural narrative about what it means to be a man just doesn't sit right with you, this is the deep dive you've been waiting for.
Yeah, specifically, if you identify with the red-pilled community or you're just someone looking for a sanity check against what Riker calls the institutional capture of society by feminist and Marxist ideologies, pull up a chair. Riker is mapping out exactly how we got from the 1990s to, well, to here.
And before we launch into this, because we are going to be throwing a massive amount of data at you today, divorce stats, workplace fatalities, evolutionary psychology, it's a lot.
It's a lot. So I have to say, we are just giving you the high-level recon here. If you want the full resistance manual, as Riker calls it, you need to go buy this book right now. It is available on Amazon Kindle and Google Play Books.
Absolutely. Also, do us a quick favor, hit that like and subscribe button right now. It really helps us keep the lights on and keep bringing you this kind of unfiltered analysis that you honestly just aren't going to find in mainstream outlets.
Right.
Okay, so let's set the stage. Riker's core thesis is that the 1990s were not just, a decade of good music and bad fashion. He calls it the last golden age of manhood. Why the 90s? Why is that his line in the sand?
It's a really fascinating baseline. Riker argues that the 90s were the last era where society still honored biological reality. That's before, in his view, we traded backbone for safe spaces. He paints this picture of a time when gender roles weren't viewed as these oppressive constructs that had to be dismantled.
They were just practical.
Exactly, a functional
Yeah.
division of labor that actually worked. He uses that Ford assembly line analogy, right? Which, it sounds a bit cold when you first hear it, but in the context of the book, he means it as a huge compliment regarding efficiency.
Yeah, he's talking about efficiency and stability. He argues that in the 90s, generally speaking, men built things. Bridges, skyscrapers, families, and women nurtured those families. Everyone knew their position on the line.
It wasn't about one being better than the other.
No, it was about the unit functioning to produce a stable society. When you strip away those roles, Riker argues you don't actually get equality, you get chaos. You get a machine where the gears are just grinding against each other because no one knows who is supposed to be doing what anymore.
And that leads us to one of the most provocative concepts in the early chapters, biological treason, which goes way beyond just saying boys will be boys. This is a fundamental critique of how we view male biology today.
Right, this is where he brings in the evolutionary psychology. Riker's argument is that testosterone isn't just a hormone that makes you aggressive or horny. It is the literal engine of civilization.
He brings receipts for this too.
He does. He cites data showing how testosterone increases pain tolerance and drives the risk-taking behavior that is absolutely necessary for high-stakes labor. We're talking about the drive to climb a high-voltage tower in a freezing storm to fix the grid, or the drive to rush into a burning building.
But the treason part is that society now treats that engine as a defect.
Precisely. He argues we've pathologized the very traits that keep us alive. We label competitiveness, stoicism, and aggression as toxic, but we still demand the fruits of that aggression. We want the lights to stay on, we want the bridges to hold, but we want the men building them to act like HR managers.
There's a specific stat that really hammers this home. He talks about the glass cellar. Because everyone talks about the glass ceiling, but we rarely look down at the foundation.
That is a crucial data point in the book. Riker highlights that 97% of construction and high-risk infrastructure work is performed by male crews. The death rates on these jobs are just astronomical compared to office work.
And his point is that there's no push for diversity in the sewers.
Exactly. There's no push for 50% female representation on deep-sea oil rigs where you might get crushed by heavy machinery.
It's selective equality. We want the corner office, but not the coal mine.
That's the exact phrase he uses. We want equality in the air-conditioned boardroom, but we're perfectly happy to leave the dangerous, dirty, lethal jobs to men. And Riker connects this hypocrisy directly to what he calls the capture of institutions.
Meaning the shift away from merit.
Right. He argues we've moved from a meritocracy where the most competitive person got the job, regardless of anyone's feelings, to a system ruled by DEI initiatives.
He uses Boeing as a case study here. And that is a terrifying connection to make, linking corporate ideology to actual engineering failure.
It's terrifying, but he lays it out so clearly. He traces the timeline of when major corporations like Boeing shifted focus from engineering excellence, which, as he points out, is often a ruthless testosterone-driven obsession with mechanics and perfection, to prioritizing ESG scores and diversity quotas.
Because gravity doesn't care about your ideology.
Exactly. When you prioritize quotas over competence, things literally start falling out of the sky. The 737MX disasters, in his view, are the downstream effect of suppressing that traditional masculine drive for mechanical perfection in favor of political correctness.
So that's the workplace. But Riker suggests this suppression starts way earlier. He calls the education system the indoctrination pipeline. And honestly, looking at the data he presents, it's hard to argue against it.
This section is going to resonate with a lot of fathers listening. Riker argues that schools have effectively declared war on boyhood. He breaks down how natural male behaviors like fidgeting, high energy, roughhousing, competitiveness, they're no longer seen as growing pains. They are diagnosed as disorders.
We are medicating personality traits just because they don't fit the quiet classroom model.
We are medicating masculinity out of existence. He cites the massive disparity in ADHD prescriptions between boys and girls. But the anecdote that really captures the absolute insanity of this zero-tolerance culture is the Pop-Tart gun.
Oh man, I remember this. A kid got suspended for chewing a pastry into a shape that vaguely resembled a pistol, right?
A 7-year-old boy suspended. Riker uses that to illustrate just how fearful the system has become of anything even remotely resembling male aggression. It's not about safety. A pastry cannot hurt you.
It's about conditioning.
Yes. It's about signaling to that boy that his natural instinct, even in innocent play, is bad and dangerous. Riker argues we are stripping boys of their nature before they even hit puberty, sanding down their edges to fit them into a box that was essentially designed for the temperament of girls.
And the result, he argues, is that we send these boys out into a world that is still harsh and competitive, completely unprepared. They've been trained to be compliant in a world that requires them to be dominant to survive.
Which segues perfectly into the legal and economic meat of the book, because if the school system is the jab, the family court system is the knockout punch. Riker uses the term economic castration.
It's a very visceral term, but he backs it up with some extremely heavy stats regarding divorce.
He really does. He focuses heavily on no-fault divorce. The data he cites suggests that women initiate somewhere between 70 to 80% of divorces. That is a massive skew. But the kicker is the financial aftermath. He claims men pay roughly 97% of alimony.
So if you look at that as a business transaction, one party has the power to break the contract at any time, for any reason, and the other party is almost guaranteed to pay the massive financial penalty.
Exactly. Riker views marriage under current laws as a literal liability trap for men. And it gets darker when he discusses the Silverman strategy.
Right, explain there for the audience. That refers to custody battles.
Yes, it refers to the legal tactic of using false or exaggerated accusations of abuse to gain immediate leverage in custody or asset disputes. Riker points out that the system is heavily biased toward protecting the accuser first and asking questions later.
So if a woman wants the house and the kids, the quickest route is a temporary restraining order.
Even if it's overturned later, the status quo has been set. The father is physically out of the house, and he is entirely on the defensive, legally and financially.
And once the father's out of the house, we hit the fatherhood crisis. This was honestly the hardest part of the book to read.
Yeah.
The stats on what happens to kids without dads are just staggering.
They're undeniable. Riker cites that fatherless homes produce 85% of youth prisoners and 71% of high school dropouts. He calls this state-sponsored kidnapping.
Wow.
He argues that the tender years doctrine, this old legal presumption that mothers are inherently better caregivers, has effectively erased fathers from the family unit, reducing them to weekend visitors and walking paychecks.
He paints a very vivid picture of the disposable dad, the guy living in his studio apartment or his truck, working massive overtime to fund a household he isn't even allowed to enter.
It ties back to the Medusa effect, or what he also calls the double bind trap. This is a crucial concept for the listener to understand. Riker argues that society is completely schizophrenic about what it wants from men.
How so?
Well, on one hand, in a crisis like 9/11, we worship the stoic protector. We want the firefighter who charges up the stairs without weeping. We want the soldier. We want men to be tough, disposable, and brave. But in daily life, That exact same stoicism is labeled toxic or emotionally stunted.
So you get to be a warrior when the building is burning, but a sensitive poet when the dishes need doing. And if you can't switch that off instantly, you are the problem.
Correct. Riker argues you cannot have it both ways. You cannot shame the aggression and drive that builds civilization and then expect it to be there on demand when you need saving. He says men are checking out because the game is rigged to punish them regardless of what move they make.
Speaking of checking out, let's shift to the dating apocalypse. Because if the marriage market is a trap, Riker argues the dating market is an absolute wasteland. He dives deep into sexual market value.
This is the red pill core of the book. Riker analyzes data from apps like Tinder and Bumble to prove what he calls female nature regarding hypergamy.
Hypergamy being the instinct to date across or up the socioeconomic hierarchy.
Right, and the numbers he presents are just brutal for the average guy. He cites data claiming that on dating apps, women swipe right on only roughly 4.5% of men.
Wait, let that sink in for the listener. 4.5%. That means 95% of men are essentially invisible to women on these platforms.
Conversely, men swipe right on over 50% of women. Riker argues this creates a winner-take-all economy. The top tier of men, the top 4 or 5%, the chads as the internet calls them, are getting almost all the attention. The bottom 80% of men are fighting for scraps. It completely distorts the reality of men's value.
And yet, the narrative sold to women is that they can have it all. Riker is pretty savage about the whole career woman narrative.
He really takes it apart. He discusses the fertility cliff and the epiphany phase. He presents data on IVF failure rates and surveys showing the reported unhappiness of career-focused women post-35 compared to traditional homemakers.
The argument being that feminism sold them a false promise.
Exactly, telling them a corporate title would fulfill them more than a family. Riker argues that biology eventually hands them the bill, but by then, the good men they ignored in their 20s have either checked out or moved on entirely.
And he anchors this in David Buss's research, right? This isn't just his opinion. He's claiming it is biologically hardwired.
Yes. David Buss's study of 37 cultures is the cornerstone here. The research shows that across every culture and every time period, women prioritize resources and dominance. They want a provider and a protector. Riker's argument is that no amount of modern woke conditioning can reprogram millions of years of evolution.
They might say they want a sensitive ally.
Right, they might say they want a guy who cries during movies, but their swipe data proves they actually want the dominant provider.
It's the classic difference between revealed preference and stated preference. But if this is biological reality, why is the media narrative so incredibly different? Riker dedicates a whole chapter to the media's war on men.
He does a side-by-side comparison that is actually quite funny, but also deeply depressing. He contrasts 90s heroes with today's depictions of men.
The Terminator versus Homer Simpson.
Exactly. In the 90s, even your flawed heroes were highly competent. They solved problems. They were stoic. Now, look at almost any sitcom or commercial. The dad trope is a bumbling idiot who can't figure out the microwave and needs his smart, long-suffering wife to tell him how to tie his shoes.
Or in modern action movies, the male hero is deconstructed.
He's deconstructed, he's lectured by a female character, or he's shown to be obsolete. Riker argues this is a deliberate psychological conditioning to mock male competence and systematically lower men's self-esteem.
So we have the diagnosis, and it is incredibly bleak. The workplace is hostile, schools are drugging boys, the courts are a liability trap, and the dating market is skewed against 95% of men. But the book isn't just a list of complaints. He titles it a resistance manual. Riker pivots to solutions. What does he actually tell men to do?
This is where the book becomes highly actionable. He calls for rebuilding brotherhood. He argues that men have become way too isolated. He pushes for the creation and utilization of male-only spaces.
Back to Jen.
The gym is central to his philosophy. He calls it the modern monastery. But he also talks about barbershops, fraternal orders, poker nights, anywhere men can be around other men without the female gaze or the constant need to police their language. He argues men need to recharge that masculine energy without apologizing for it.
And he breaks down a specific protocol for the individual man. It's a three-pronged approach: financial, physical, and mindset. Let's hit financial first.
Financial is all about defense. He advises aggressively protecting your assets. He leans heavily into the MGTOW philosophy here, men going their own way. He advises against legal marriage under current laws because the risk-to-reward ratio is simply too bad. He talks about the testosterone tax, implying men pay a premium just to exist, so they need to be ruthless about resource retention.
And the second prong, physical. We touched on the gym, but it's more than just looking good for the beach.
It is about capability. He completely rejects the dad bod acceptance movement.
Yeah.
He says that is a psyop designed to make men weak and complacent. The mandate is to lift heavy. He says you need to be dangerous, not violent, he makes a clear distinction there, but capable of violence.
A harmless man isn't good, he's just harmless.
Exactly. A good man is a dangerous man who keeps his sword sheathed until it is absolutely needed.
That is a very powerful distinction. And finally, mindset. This honestly seems like the hardest one to implement.
Because it requires the most deprogramming. Riker says men must absolutely reject the label of toxic, and he warns heavily against the vulnerability scam.
The vulnerability scam, let's dig into that.
It's the trap where society or a romantic partner tells a man to open up, to cry, to be vulnerable. But Riker argues that as soon as a man actually does this, as soon as he shows true weakness or insecurity, he is instantly punished for it. His partner loses sexual attraction, or his workplace sees him as unstable.
So his advice is just to not take the bait.
His advice is blunt. Do not fall for it. Maintain stoicism. Become unapologetically masculine.
He also mentions that we need to build parallel systems, which I found really interesting.
Yes, he praises the underground networks of fathers who are actively bypassing the school system. He talks about dads teaching their sons woodworking, mechanics, hunting, financial literacy, basically building a parallel curriculum to ensure their sons don't grow up soft. It's about taking responsibility for the transmission of masculinity because the state refuses to do it.
It's fascinating because he frames it entirely as a survival guide. It's not just, oh, I miss the 90s. It's, the system is hostile to your biological nature, and here's exactly how you survive it.
That is the synthesis of the whole book. He argues that the world is rigged against men, so men need to stop playing by rules that were written to make them lose.
Which brings us to that final, really haunting question the book leaves us with. We talked about the glass cellar earlier, the men in the sewers and on the power lines.
It's the question of the strike. If civilization entirely relies on male sacrifice, on men doing the dirty, dangerous, invisible jobs that keep the lights on and the water running, what happens when men simply stop participating?
Right. What happens when they look at the deal society offers? Work hard, risk your life, pay for everything, and we will call you toxic and take your kids, and they just say no thanks.
It is essentially the premise of Atlas Shrugged, but applied directly to gender dynamics. And Riker seems to think that strike isn't just coming, he thinks it is already here. You see it in the labor force participation rates of young men, you see it in the massive drop in marriage rates. Men are already voting with their feet.
That is a incredibly sobering thought to end on. Look, we have really only scratched the surface of the data, the charts, and the specific legal breakdowns in this text today. If you want the full playbook, the deep dive into the divorce stats, the dating app algorithms, the specific strategies for asset protection, you need to buy 90s Life for Men, pre-feminism, when women were women on Amazon Kindle or Google Playbooks immediately.
Absolutely. This is a very dense text, and we just couldn't cover every nuance. If you are serious about understanding this cultural shift, you need to read the source material for yourself.
And make sure you follow the author at Conrad Riker on Substack. He's putting out ongoing analysis that tracks all of these trends in real time.
It is definitely worth a follow if you want to stay ahead of the curve.
That is it for this deep dive. Do us a favor, like, subscribe, and share this with a friend who really needs to hear the truth. See you next time.